On this week's 51%, former Tennessee state legislator and judge Carol Chumney reflects on the lessons she's learned from her long-running political career and the barriers that keep women from the political arena.
You have to get more numbers up for women, then you get more different types of women, different perspectives and viewpoints that can change the climate and the culture.
We also hear from the founder of a Florida-based nonprofit supporting homeless youth. I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessie King. Campaign season is here, even if November's presidential election might seem far away. There's currently only 151 women in Congress from both parties. That's about 28.2%. In fact, according to Rutgers Center for American Women in Politics, even though women make up 51% of our population, they make up only about 30% of our local, state, and federal lawmakers, give and take. Our main guest today was one of them. Carol Chumney served in the Tennessee House of Representatives from 1991 to 2003, where she passed legislation on child care reform. Chumney, a Democrat, also served 4 years on the Memphis City Council and came within points of becoming the first woman elected mayor of the city in 2007. To this day, Memphis still hasn't had a woman mayor, and of course, the state of Tennessee has yet to have a woman governor. Chumney is now a judge in Shelby County Circuit Court. She recently wrote a book looking back on her political career called The Arena, One Woman's Story. In it, she also reflects on the barriers that she says still keeps many women out of politics today.
I did enter politics, and I was fortunate enough to be elected at the age of 29 to the Tennessee State House of Representatives, where I served for 13 years. And I did achieve some leadership positions there. Even though I was one of only 13 women out of 99, I was able to be elected House Majority Whip, and also served as one of the first women in the entire state legislature in Tennessee to chair a standing committee. I chaired the House Children and Family Affairs Committee. So that part of my dream came true. I passed the state's first sexual harassment law, and that was very hard because what happened was, it was a very masculine environment. It still is. And a female legislative assistant came to me. She said, "Representative Chumney, there's sexual harassment going on in the legislature." And I wasn't really surprised because as a young female, newly elected state representative, they used to pass these little silly notes on the House floor to kind of, I guess, break tedium, because sometimes there were long sessions. And they would send these little anonymous notes through the bailiffs where they would say, something silly. But it went too far. I got passed anonymously a condom on the House floor. And it was kind of scary to me, even though I had some power as a female legislator, and the legislative assistants, they were employees. They didn't have any power. So I filed the state's first sexual harassment law to require the state legislature and judicial and executive branches to have sexual harassment policies. And nobody talked to me for the rest of the session. They were all so mad at me. But we did get it passed, and we got our first policy. Only about a year later, a male legislator was charged with sexual harassment by a legislative assistant, and they had to apply the policy for the first time, and he ended up losing his chairmanship. She had tape recorded him, and he lost his chairmanship and got some other punishment because of it. So it did work.
I mean, I'm sure the fact that it's mostly men contributes to that masculine environment, but are there any other factors that you think also kind of help keep that status quo?
Well, I pondered that, and somebody told me once, we used to go to these conferences and, of the female legislators from around the country. And I remember talking to one of their speakers about it, because I was like, one of the dynamics at that point is some of the women didn't like each other in the legislature. And I asked them about it. I said, why are these? I always tried to stay out of it. I didn't want to be like part of this group or that group. And I'm like, what's going on? And he said, well, look, it's such a tough arena for women, environment for women, that the women that go there are a lot of times stronger, more independent. So see, you have to get more numbers up for women, then you get more different types of women, different perspectives and viewpoints that can change the climate and the culture. But if you only have a few women, then it's going to stay that way. And so I think that's part of it.
That's interesting. So do you mean like, there's like this pressure not to push against that toxic masculinity to, I guess, protect your own status in it?
Well, no, I think it was the opposite. I mean, I think the women there were speaking up. It takes a lot to be in the political arena. You have to be willing to, face maybe public humiliation. I mean, if somebody's going to say something bad about you, people are going to lie about you, people are going to make stuff up. You might be on the front page of the newspaper with a story about you or your family. And you have to be willing to go into that arena understanding that, yes, there are going to be some good days and bad days. You have to really want to do it. And the saying that we have, maybe it's everywhere, is you have to have the fire in your belly, that you want to do it. And so because of that, some women, I think, just shy away from it a bit. But I think if you had more and more women there, it wouldn't be, it would be easier.
Well, to get a little bit more into the book, in the book you lay out two things that you think need to happen to make the political arena more accessible for women. The first is election reform, and the second is a cultural shift away from gender bias. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that second one, and I think it would be good to discuss what gender bias looks like, because while I think most people understand the term, it's harder to identify it when it's happening in front of you. You mentioned in the book about the glass ceiling, you have to see it in order to do something about it.
Yeah, the phrase I coined is you first have to see it to defeat it. I wrote a book to try to expose that because I wanted to document it. I wanted to make it objective, not something like, you go to the doctor and you say, they say about women, I have PMS, and the doctor would say, oh, it's all in your head. So I didn't want people to think that about the glass ceiling. It's not in our head. I had kept newspaper clippings for 25 years and media clippings. So I thought maybe if I write a book, I can show and tell the glass ceiling. Like, for example, when I was running for re-election to the state house, I was the best thing since sliced bread in the press, and it would be, she passed major child care reform, which we didn't get to talk about, but I did. But when I was running for mayor, I was marginalized and my record was marginalized. So I used those newspaper clippings to show it. And I even have one reporter here who, after the book came out, the good thing about it is I've managed to have good relationships still with the people that I wrote about in the book who are still alive, including reporters. But, he even said, I kind of regret writing that now, because at one point I was running for mayor and he wrote some story. I saw a gang of kids down on the riverfront set a fire, and we reported it and no police came. And then we reported the reporter, because he couldn't get the police to verify it. He wrote a story like I was seeing UFOs, and I had to, just basically bully him into changing it, because we did end up with independent witnesses later verifying what we saw.
Well, once we recognize gender bias, what are some of the first things you think could help with that cultural shift?
Well, one thing, and I thought about that a lot, because I thought, you don't want to write a book that's a whiny book or a book that's negative or being critical or mean to people. So I try to be really careful in the book to be respectful of everybody that I talked about in the book, but also to try to think about what could change it. And one thing I did talk about is the press and the media. They have a very important role in terms of how they portray women. And when women are trying to run for higher office, they need to be treated with respect just as the men are and given an equal chance. So I feel like the press and the media are very important. I make an observation in the book. For example, the first woman mayor of Nashville, at that point, the Tennessean, they had a majority female editorial board that endorsed that woman when she was running for mayor. It made a big difference, I think, in her election. And it was because there were women in leadership at that newspaper who did that. The press and the media is critical in terms of changing the dialogue and the way we treat women and talk about women. But I also feel like we have to give women a chance. That doesn't mean vote for a woman just because she's a woman, because that's where people get in their head about that. And even women sometimes feel like they have to apologize. They'll say, well, I'm going to vote for her, but not because she's a woman, like they're apologizing or have to explain it. And I'm just saying, hey, just vote for the best person. Many times that's going to be a woman. If you just vote for the best person, it's all going to work out.
Carol Chumney is a former Tennessee state legislator and Memphis City Councilwoman who now serves as an elected judge in Shelby County Circuit Court. Her book detailing her political career and the obstacles faced by women lawmakers is called The Arena, One Woman's Story. It's out now through Lady Justice Publishing. In Vermont, Governor Phil Scott and domestic violence support groups say a new partnership is aiming to help domestic survivors get out by improving their financial skills. WAMC's Pat Bradley brings us more.
Scott, a Republican, said sexual abuse and domestic violence is on the rise. He cited data that in 2023, the member organizations of the Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence received more than 23,000 calls and provided in-person assistance to nearly 8,500 survivors. Scott announced a new initiative to help.
This initiative will help survivors with financial empowerment, because studies have shown that economic instability is one of the primary barriers preventing victims of domestic and sexual violence from leaving the situation they find themselves in. Our work to address the crisis of domestic and sexual violence cannot stop until it's no longer needed.
Vermont Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence Executive Director Karen Tronsgaard Scott says the initiative is unique due to the collaboration between the nonprofit, business, and the public sectors.
This new initiative will utilize financial empowerment training and credit building opportunities. The financial toll of domestic and sexual violence is immense. At the network, we estimate that our state spends over $100 million a year responding to domestic violence, and this includes the costs associated with the response from law enforcement, corrections, medical, and social services. But by far the most profound cost of domestic violence is on victims and survivors themselves.
The partnership includes the network, M&T Bank, and the Vermont Treasurer's Office. M&T Bank Vermont Regional President Heidi Stumpf says financial literacy is critical for domestic and sexual violence survivors to regain independence, and the bank will provide funding for the initiative.
M&T Bank has pledged $100,000 over 4 years to the statewide partnership to bring financial literacy to a vulnerable group of Vermonters. Financial literacy is a critical piece for domestic and sexual violence survivors to regain independence. Additionally, our M&T employees, through their commitment to volunteerism, are poised to provide the critical training and one-on-one support through the 15 advocate agencies throughout Vermont.
Vermont Treasurer Michael Pichek says the office has long advocated for financial literacy, and after he took office, he wanted to create a program that would not only teach, but help empower those involved.
The partnership will also include a financial match program available to survivors. The match funds will be offered to participants to boost their savings. There'll also be a financial empowerment grant program, both of which will be administered by the network. And then I also want to call out the Office of the Massachusetts Treasurer, who implemented a similar program with M&T Bank in Massachusetts over the last few years. This was an opportunity for us to learn from partners within New England, to build on it and make it something unique for Vermont.
Tronsgaard Scott called the $100,000 funding commitment significant.
This will give us the opportunity to train those advocates, and then they can come away with enough money for a deposit on an apartment or on a car to pay off utility bills that are sitting outstanding left over from their abusive relationship. Another provision in this program is credit repair. And so we're looking forward to making that $100,000 have the biggest impact possible.
Circle Vermont, Washington County's domestic violence agency based in Barre, provides shelter, legal aid, and support for abuse victims and survivors. Shelter coordinator Ari Menard hears many different stories of abuse and has found the biggest barrier to allowing survivors to move out and reestablish their lives is financial abuse.
I'm excited that we're recognizing the harms and barriers faced by the people I work with. And programs such as this that address the financial toll of abuse and the impossibility of exiting poverty under conditions of oppression create a more equitable, just, and fair world for all.
Governor Scott signed a proclamation declaring February 6th Financial Empowerment for Victims of Domestic and Sexual Violence Day in Vermont. I'm Pat Bradley, WAMC News.
Finally, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, on a single night in 2023, more than 34,000 people under the age of 25 experienced homelessness on their own as unaccompanied youths. About 9% of them were minors, but these kids are often not considered for foster care because they were not removed from their homes by social workers. Instead, oftentimes they are turned out by their guardians or choose to leave home for their own safety. Our last guest today says there is an invisible population of kids in the U.S. who are walking through the world alone, and without intervention, they risk slipping into chronic homelessness as adults or worse. Vicki Sokolik is the founder and CEO of the Tampa, Florida-based nonprofit Starting Right Now, which provides free housing, mentoring, and other services for unaccompanied homeless teens in the Hillsborough and Pinellas public high schools. Her new book, called If You See Them, shares the stories of some of the program's graduates and recounts her own transformation from mom to youth advocate.
My son came home his senior year of high school and told me about a girl in his class who was going to drop out of school and go work full time because she was no longer safe in her home. And as a family, we rallied behind her and gave her support. And she was my first understanding of unaccompanied homeless youth. Once my eyes were open to that, I came to discover that there were actually an abundance of unaccompanied homeless youth, and that really became my passion. And with the push from Mayor Iorio in 2007, we started a nonprofit called Starting Right Now, which is a completely holistic program that offers safe housing, academic support, life skills training, every social service you can think of so that the kids can have preventative medical care, mental health care. And then we help the kids propel to either the military, vocational training, or higher education. I'm really proud of our organization because without our support, these kids would have to do things that they wouldn't want to do in order to survive.
I'd like to talk a little bit about why kids leave, because I think there's this misconception that they're just running away from home or something like that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you said that because, prior to helping these kids, if somebody would have told me that a minor left home or got kicked out of their home, I would have immediately thought, bad kid. That is not the case at all. The kids that we serve are absolutely incredible, and they're actually leaving home for, I would say, pretty common themes. Lots of evictions that go on where families just aren't housed and the student has to go figure out where they're living. There's abuse, neglect, food insecurity. There's unfortunately rape going on in the home that sometimes the student says, forget it, I'm done. Lots of domestic violence. Eventually the student just says, if I don't get out of here, I'll never get out of here. And in order to better their life, makes that leap. Unfortunately, what happens to a student like that without support is that in order to survive, they have to kind of shift their moral compass a little bit, because they're going to have to steal, they're going to have to rob, they're going to have to what we call survival sex. One of the kids actually said it to me so eloquently. She said that after school, she was leaving and she only had one asset as a 17-year-old, which was her body. She said, you don't dream of ever doing this, but when you have no other choice, you just close your eyes and let it happen. And to think that these kids have no choice is just horrific to me. I mean, once they enter our program, their story completely changes. We now have people, kids that are serving our country. We have EMTs and paramedics and firefighters. We have teachers, social workers, nurses. We even have a doctor, a lawyer. They really can do anything, and they want to do better than they have seen. But without support, they can't.
You make it a point in the book that support is a lot more than just putting a roof over someone's head. I mean, of course, housing is important, but it's just like the basics. And your organization has done a lot, actually, to testify to lawmakers in Florida and promote laws to support these youths in other ways.
Absolutely. When we enter a student into our program, they walk in, I call it spitting fire. They're extremely angry, rightfully so. They've been let down by people who theoretically should have kept them safe. And if all our organization did was provide a bed, that student would leave us still angry, which would hinder them from, being employed, getting into relationships. Or healthy relationships, I should say. So we have developed our own curriculum that really teaches the students how to lead a healthy life, how to know when that's a healthy relationship, anger management, Dale Carnegie, etiquette, so that when they go for their first big girl, big boy job, that they know, everything about all the utensils on the table. They go through boundaries classes. It's really a full curriculum, mindfulness and meditation, so that by the time that they leave us and they go to their next goal, they feel whole and not angry anymore, which changes everything. And as far as the laws, Florida is leading in the state because of starting right now in protecting these youth. When I first started this, these kids had zero safety net. And when I testified the very first time, all the House of Representatives were like, we don't understand. Aren't these kids in foster care? There's an assumption that someone is taking care of them, when in reality, no one is. And so we have actually been able to author and amend 10 laws in the state of Florida to make sure that these kids do have a safety net. They can access now their birth certificates and social security cards as a minor, which if you don't have those, you can't even get a job. We teach our kids financial literacy through their earned income of their job. And if you can't get a job, you can't learn that skill, and employability skills are so important. We had the Medicaid law change so that our kids now can get Medicaid independent from their families, and as a minor can consent for their health care. We just kept going down, and wherever there were holes, we just kept changing laws, because these kids need support and they need resources available to them. I'm very hopeful that the book will open the eyes of a lot of people that are the policymakers, and that we can change these laws on a national level. Because if you look at other states, there really is not support for these youth. And there's 1.7 million of these youth counted in the US. I can tell you that that number is actually incorrect, because when we're interviewing a student, they have not been coded yet as an unaccompanied homeless youth. So my guess is there's double that. You know, if we want to have strong communities, we have to help these youth.
The youths you work with are between the ages of 15 and 19. How do you usually find them? How do you usually learn of these youths?
So our primary referral source is the school districts. You take someone like Courtney, who's featured in the book, and she started having excessive absences, which was not like her. She was getting referrals at school for bullying and fighting, which was not like her. She was putting her head down on her desk and not wanting to do work, which was not like her. And as the guidance counselor kept talking to her, she finally revealed that she was sleeping on a park bench. And the reason she had excessive absences each month was due to her period. She had no access to feminine hygiene products. On those days, she couldn't go to school. So we interviewed her, and she definitely fit the criteria for the program. We enrolled her. The very first thing that we do is put them in our safe housing so that they can take a breath and know that they have a bed to sleep in. They have access to food because we have a community kitchen that's always stocked. They have transportation to their school of origin. And now they have adults in their life that are reliable. We have house managers that live with the kids at the house. And then she's immediately funneled into our social services department so that she applies for food stamps and she applies for Medicaid. And from there, she gets academic support and starts our life skill classes. And today, she's a registered nurse, a wife, a mother, a homeowner. She's incredible.
It's just wild to think about how something that we might take for granted, just like tampons or pads, can actually hold someone back in life if they don't have it. I've spoken on this program with a founder of a nonprofit who helps make feminine hygiene products for underprivileged girls in other countries, like around the globe. But it's easy to forget that there's probably a need for that here, too.
Exactly. And, we had a student years ago who was actually arrested by a big box store for stealing feminine hygiene products. No one ever stopped to ask her if she needed help, if she was okay. She was charged. I can't even wrap my head around that.
Are there any other issues that you see unaccompanied homeless girls particularly experiencing?
Yeah, the biggest fear, obviously, is that they will be trafficked, especially in Florida, because our trafficking rate is so high. And, this is the most vulnerable population. They're young, they're easily swayed, they need to make money, and so they will follow somebody that probably could get them into trouble. The other thing is that they end up with these petty theft arrests. Courtney is an example where she was freezing on the park bench and she shoplifted a jacket. Again, no one asked her why. She was charged with this petty theft, which ended up following her, even though she was put into a misdemeanor intervention program. It kept coming up every time. When she applied to college, it came up. When she applied to nursing school, it came up. It was an ordeal to get it expunged. Well, as a child, how do you get something expunged if you don't have someone that can help you?
Well, Vicki, thank you so much for joining us. Lastly, are there things the average person can do here to help these kids or to make the issue less invisible?
We should be asking kids if they need help and if something is going on that they can't tell anyone about, because so many times we look at these kids and we say, what's wrong with them? And I have to admit, I was extremely judgmental prior to helping Amanda, our, very first student that we helped. And my judgment was so off base, and I just think that there's not a bad kid. These kids are dealt bad hands, and someone in their life can really reshuffle that deck, and they could end up being taxpayers in our society and helping build a safer community.
Vicki Sokolik is the founder and CEO of the Tampa, Florida-based nonprofit Starting Right Now, which provides free housing and other services for unaccompanied homeless youth between the ages of 15 and 19 in the Hillsborough and Pinellas public high schools. Her new book detailing her work and sharing the stories of some of their graduates is called If You See Them, Young, Unhoused, and Alone in America. It's out now through Spiegel and Grau. You can learn more about the nonprofit at startingrightnow.org. You've been listening to 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio in Albany, New York. It's produced and hosted by me, Jesse King. Our associate producer is Jody Cowan, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. Just a reminder that you can listen to 51% anytime at our website, WAMCpodcast.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can stay in the loop on all of WAMC shows by signing up for our weekly newsletter Airwaves at WAMC.org. We hope you'll join us next week. Until then, I'm Jesse King for 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh. And I lost my cool somewhere along